Hi, welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by Renee Rose, and today we're going to be talking about missing persons 411. But before we get started, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
I found it. My dream job. I went to Moorpark College and learned the skills that earned me a new career in just 1 year. And now, I'm doing what I love and making more money than ever. Moorpark College will help you get back to work at a job you love. Enroll now and follow your dream to a new career. I found it. So can you at moorparkcollege.edu/CE.
Renee, thank you for coming on today. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the topics that you've written about and some of the things that you've done some research on?
Sure, yeah. I have written about really a wide variety of things, just kind of things that have interested me, things that have kind of been popular in science news, and then kind of more paranormal stuff. And one of my most popular articles is actually How You Found Me, that was based around isolated staircases being found in woods basically around the world. And the story was sourced from a Reddit forum, basically where this writer was detailing their experiences in search and rescue. And that one of the things they shared was people had been finding these staircases kind of just in the middle of nowhere, where it kind of was something that among the search and rescue teams was actually a pretty common occurrence. They were kind of told by their superiors, don't talk about them, don't approach them. And this story really blew up on this Reddit forum and kind of went viral. And I wrote a story about it, and I knew at the time that there was no real evidence that this was a legitimate thing, but people that were responding to the forum kind of shared their own experiences, saying they'd seen similar things. And it was really interesting to me, so I wrote a story about it. And since then, I have found out that it's basically a creepypasta. It's a really well-written creepypasta. But, yeah, I kind of write about things like that. I write about science news and the paranormal and just kind of unexplained things. And that's what I feature mostly on my publication.
For the staircases in the woods thing, because I remember I probably first heard about that maybe, 4 years ago, something like that.
Right.
So that one is definitively proven to just kind of more be a creepypasta. Like I guess it probably is randomly. Even out I'm on the West Coast, and even out here, there's randomly, there's staircases in random mountains and stuff, and the beach, especially like near the beach. I've seen those quite a bit, but not like what this Reddit post was alleging, right? Because weren't these staircases more just kind of freestanding?
Yeah, the writer actually detailed that they were found freestanding kind of in really odd locations, and mostly these weren't found in high traveled areas. So you had to go 40 to 60 miles into the wilderness basically to find these things. Kind of just in areas that are basically untouched by man, which is what made it such a weird sight, because when these stairs were being talked about, basically it was said that, you would assume there'd be evidence of, if they were built by settlers or something like that, that there'd be evidence of a foundation to a house or something like that. And there was never any evidence of that. And even some of these staircases were in pretty immaculate shape, and the writer described them as basically being taken out of a house and just plopped in the middle of nowhere. But one thing I do have to say about the staircases is, although that original thread has been confirmed to be fiction, it is, I think you have to think about the fact that so many people that read the story were kind of giving their own experiences. And, it could just be a coincidence. It could just be people there were a lot of people that said that they had also seen similar things in woods, and, were even as detailed as giving locations and stuff like that. So even though the story is fiction, I don't really think you can write it off completely, just because it did resonate with so many people, and so many people claim to see it themselves. So, that could be true. There's really weird things that are being found in forests and areas where people just don't really go, and we don't really know, I think, what's out there until we kind of come across it. So,
well, I think you raised a really interesting point. I mean, the idea of, even the woods, so to speak, or the desert or whatever, like just, swaths of land in the United States that are just so, I mean, they're charted, I guess, but in a sense, there's so few people go there. And I mean, the same thing applies for, Canada, or even apply to a lesser extent, maybe even like Mexico, where these land masses are huge, and especially Canada and Canada and America. I mean, there's so much land. I mean, I remember I spent a summer in the state of Washington. Yeah, there was just woods everywhere. I mean, I don't know, when you really start thinking about it, like kind of what you're saying. I mean, there are areas that are just miles and miles away from where people live, and God knows what's happening in those areas. I mean. So
exactly, even things that have happened in the past, maybe that we just don't have any record of. So it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, and I think I came across this story, and I know we talked about it a little bit in our email correspondence too. What led me to this was the missing 411 work that David Poliitis has done, and that stuff that hasn't been disproven at all, has it?
No, not to my knowledge. Really, he just makes, which we'll get into, but he makes a lot of points that basically can't be disproven. And one thing I really like about David Poliitis, and since I've been researching him more and stuff like that, is he kind of gives, he details the cases and he provides the information that he has, but one thing I really admire is he never really states what his own opinions are about it. He kind of leaves it up to the reader. And, that could be argued it's because he doesn't know, but I really admire the way he kind of compiles his evidence and presents it and doesn't really put a solid conclusion on it.
Yeah, I mean, you raised a really good point. I mean, when you start, offering up, well, this happened, or it's this, or it's that, then that can lead people to discredit and say, oh, well, it's not this or that because, these are that reasons. But if you wouldn't mind, could you describe his work and what you read about it? Like maybe in a nutshell, kind of like what it is that he has written about in his subject matters?
Yeah, absolutely. So in what I've found, David Poliitis, he's a former police detective, and he's now an investigator and writer that's known mostly for his self-published books. The first two books that he wrote that I found were actually centered around proving the reality of Bigfoot, basically, as he describes it. So he wrote The Hooper Project, Bigfoot Encounters is the name of the book, and he published that in 2008. And then in 2009, he published Tribal Bigfoot. And those books actually, I don't know how much attention they initially gained from readers, but it was enough to the extent that when David Poliitis was in a national forest at one time, he was approached by a park ranger who David Poliitis has left his name anonymous, probably because he doesn't want any problems with his job and stuff like that. But he spoke to him and basically told him about all these cases that aren't getting that much media attention. And there's all these cases of people going missing in national forests, and that anytime he ever tried to press the issue with his superiors or anything like that, he was basically given a lot of pushback and told not to really question it. And it's interesting because in what I've seen of David Poliitis' work since I've been looking into it, experts kind of, which he's an expert on the subject as well, but experts say that up to 1,600 people in the United States on a yearly basis go missing in national forests. And while a majority of them are found, there are hundreds of people that are just seemingly vanish and no trace of them is ever found. And the really weird thing about all of this, which kind of prompted David Poliitis to research this topic, was there's no known database being kept by the National Park Services of as to these missing people. And, he's kind of described that some places will keep records, and it's kind of on a scale of how detailed they are. Either there's really extensive records kept of these people that are missing, and there's obviously a lot of care put into it, or it's like there's nothing at all, really. And something interesting about the whole thing, as David Poliitis started researching this stuff more, is he started to himself receive a lot of pushback from the National Park Services and, even the FBI, basically questioning why he was looking into this. And, they were refusing to release files or saying that they didn't have them. And it's just really odd to me that, there's a national database for people going missing in the United States, for towns and cities and more populated areas. But there's no such thing like that for people that go missing in national forests. And that's kind of bizarre to me. That's one of the most bizarre things about his work.
Well, I think with his research, because I've listened to probably, a dozen interviews that he's given, and just, I haven't read any of the books, but I've read excerpts from him, and especially listened to his interviews, and it just sounds like so many of these cases. I think what's so appealing, or something that's so interesting about them, is just the idea that the people that disappear really just seems bizarre. Young children that, they're in a campsite with their parents, and then, they just disappear, and they're found, whatever it is, 5 miles away up a mountain, or, or you have something where there's, four guys hiking, and one of the guys disappears, and he's found 25 miles away or something like that, and he's passed away, or he's, dead at that point. And there's that stuff where you just start to scratch your head. You say, okay, fine, weird stuff is always happening in the world, and, that's understandable. And, of course, someone's hiking, they might fall down the hill and die, unfortunately, but with his stuff and the things that he's described, it's far more unique than that.
It really is. And another really interesting thing about David Poliitis' research is he has, of the cases that he's looked into, he has found, I believe he said, about 1,200 cases that all follow a pretty similar, similar criteria. And he calls these profile points. And these are things that many of these cases have in common that are kind of bizarre. And as I was looking into this, it was basically that one of the profile points is, of course, they occur in a rural setting, so outdoors and in national parks, for example. Another profile point is that no witnesses are typically around when this person goes missing, or if there are witnesses, it's a point of separation where suddenly, for some reason, and this can sometimes happen in seconds, a person is out of their eyesight, and when they turn around, they're completely gone. And that's really interesting to me, because it's like these things seem to happen in many of these cases, like in an instance. Another profile point is that they usually go missing in areas where there's significant cover, where there's plants and rocks and overhangs and difficult terrain. Another profile point is that there's usually, when they bring out tracker dogs to locate these people or catch a scent, they can't seem to track them, or they refuse to pick up a scent at all. They kind of sit down and won't go any further, which is really interesting, because and in the cases that these tracker dogs do pick up a scent, it's usually up a mountain range. And that's especially bizarre in the case of missing children, because, some of these kids are as young as 2 years old, and they have been found, 550 feet or more up a mountain where there was incredibly difficult terrain, and they couldn't have feasibly gotten there on their own. It almost appears as though they were carried by something. So that's really interesting. Also, in many of these cases, when search and rescue teams are brought in, their searches are kind of deterred because of these random storms that pop up. In a lot of these cases, shortly after the person goes missing, literally hours or a day at most, reports of storms hitting the area occur. These happen during all seasons, and a lot of them happen at times where it seems there shouldn't have been a storm at all. And then a storm shows up out of nowhere and causes delays for the search team and eliminates tracks and the scent of the missing person. So there's a lot of, another one that's really important to mention before I forget is in a lot of these cases, people are either, if they are found, they're found missing their clothes, or during the search, articles of clothing that don't look very weathered or like they've been in the elements are found, miles from where the person was last seen. In some cases, this clothing is piled neatly or even folded, and it's kind of bizarre as to why these people are suddenly without clothes for no real reason that experts can define. But those are just a few of the profile points that he's found. That there's still many more, but of these things that these cases have in common that are just really bizarre.
I know that David Poliitis has also written about urban disappearances as well. Have you read some of that work by him as well?
I actually have not. I've actually very recently gotten into David Poliitis, and I've done a deep dive, but it's mostly been on more rural settings. So I actually don't know much about the urban areas.
I mean, I feel like with the national parks, with the disappearances there, and with the urban disappearances, I mean, it seems like, for lack of a better way of saying how, like knowing how to say this, it just seems like there's a lot of people that just kind of disappear every year in the United States in a very bizarre way. And I interviewed a person probably, 2 months ago. She runs, I'm trying to even think how you would describe it. Like, she runs a facility that helps women that have been sex trafficked primarily. And so it's a very large facility. And you were talking about the number of, women and especially even young kids that go disappearing every year. And I don't know if anybody has the big encyclopedia of how many people go missing every year between adults in parks and adults in urban areas and then children in both of those. But I just feel like this whole picture that's being painted is that there's a lot of weird stuff, it seems like, that happens every year with people in the United States, whether they disappear or they reappear, or young children. I mean, it's very strange.
Yeah, just even the sheer number of people. Like, I was looking at this one source recently that claims, it may have been USA Today, I don't quite remember, but they claim that up at any given time, there's up to 90,000 people missing in the United States just at any given time, which I think is a staggering number. It's easy for us to, kind of not think about how often things like this happen. And, in many cases, people are found, but there's a large majority of times where people just seemingly vanish in rural and urban areas alike. And it seems like there's a much greater focus on the people that go missing in urban areas as opposed to more rural areas. I think a lot of times when it comes to these cases in more rural areas, it's kind of written off after a certain amount of time as, something happened in the wilderness, whether that be an animal attack or something like that. And searches just are kind of given up after it. And it's really interesting to me. And it's interesting to me that these cases, even though they are in rural areas, don't get as much media attention. If you're someone that's into David Poliitis' work, you're more aware of these things. But until I had heard of David Poliitis' work, I had no idea how many people kind of just seemingly vanish in these rural areas. I had a pretty good grip for the most part, just in the things that I write about. I write about a lot of true crime and stuff like that, but of how many people go missing in more urban areas. But I was kind of taken aback by how many are in rural areas, and you kind of have to dig a little bit to find information on these cases and learn more about them. And it's really interesting to me.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I think one thing that adds to, maybe why they don't get that much press is, I mean, I don't know, whether it be, a man or woman, like, I mean, unless there's foul play, assumed, I mean, the police aren't really going to dedicate all of their resources to it, unless there's foul play or unless you saw something exactly happen. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if a person just one day just gets up and they say, okay, I'm leaving my life behind, I'm going to get another job. And if they were, I don't want to say like a loner per se, but if they're a person that didn't really communicate with their family a lot, maybe they don't have a lot of friends, I mean, who would even think to file a police report or something like that? And if you're not filing a police report and it's a person who's, 35 years old, well, why would anybody even think to look for that person? And right. I think that's the kind of point where it's like, that probably definitely feeds into the whole narrative of, how much resources are going to be put into it. And even the same thing with, I don't know, a 16-year-old. I mean, if a 16-year-old one day just runs away, yeah, I mean, maybe the police will kind of look for them, but, a 16-year-old, that's old enough to drive and have a job and everything. I mean, it's not like they're 6 years old where it's like, okay, a 6-year-old cannot survive on their own.
I think a great deal of it just has, as you say, it has to do with resources. One thing I find pretty interesting about David Poliitis' work is one of his documentaries. He has two documentaries that he kind of details these odd cases. And at the end of his first documentary, the Missing 411 documentary, he talks about how he reached out to the National Park Service for any kind of database on missing people and, just kind of a large compilation of these records of them. And he basically no such exists, and that to get him that kind of information would cost around $1.4 million, which is kind of it's a crazy number. I mean, I don't know how, databases work and resources per se, how much would have to be put into that, but that's kind of a crazy number to me. And so, I mean, I think you raise a good point about, how much resources wise really are going to be put into these cases, typically in more rural areas.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the element,
but there's also the element and how long they can feasibly be out there looking for someone. But it is just odd to me that even when these resources are put into finding these people, particularly in rural areas, a lot of these, there's never any evidence found whatsoever. And, you could point to the fact that maybe the person was just somehow, got outside of the area of the search and went farther than, people would think. But in so many of these cases, there's never really any evidence found of them. And it is kind of like they were just plucked out of space and just disappeared.
I mean, I guess kind of a little bit to go back to the whole urban side of it. Have you heard of a thing, and I know it's not necessarily connected to David Poliitis directly, but have you heard of this thing called the Smiley face murders? I think this was called Smiley face murders or Smiley face murder or something like that.
Yes, yeah, I have heard about that. I wouldn't say that I know enough to really remark on it too much, but I am familiar with the case.
I mean, I kind of feel like I'm in the same boat where it's like I've listened to some things. I know the gist of it from my understanding is that I think it's more of the urban areas or, whatever, the suburbs, that, there'll be people that have died in very like innocuous ways, I guess you would say, like, they drowned in a puddle, in front of a bar or whatever it may be, or, their body is found in a river. And, basically the police just say, oh, this guy was walking drunk and he fell off a bridge, or this girl was, doing blah, blah, blah. And then, she tripped and hit her head and she bled to death or whatever it is. And isn't the theory something like along the lines of, like near these places, there's like often like a smiley face or sometimes, and that it's kind of the implication that there's this group that's, I don't want to say covertly killing people, but almost that it's kind of a conspiracy in a sense to do this weird, I guess, murders and stuff. Is that kind of the gist of it?
Yeah, I believe that is kind of the gist of it, and
yeah,
they're leaving behind a subtle calling card. For
David Poliitis, I know that he hasn't really found anything like that in the woods, right?
Right, not to my knowledge. I mean, there are these weird coincidences in some of the cases, not specifically anything I'd call a calling card or anything like that, but there are these weird coincidences in some of these cases that just do seem kind of similarly bizarre, kind of just like in the profile points, but nothing that would really lead you to believe that there was some, unseen force, like people or something like that involved necessarily. It could just be coincidence, but it is stuff that makes you scratch your head a little bit. But no, that's a good point about the smiley face stuff. I think in that case, it almost seems like there's something at work and they kind of trying to make it look like these deaths are accidents and, kind of deter any further search into these things. And, if the evidence isn't there, as officials go, I can understand maybe not digging too closely, but it does make you wonder how many deaths occur that are linked in some way, and we're just yet to kind of find that link.
Well, I guess this kind of goes to an overall, theory with all of the kind of things we've talked about today is that, do you personally think that, do you think that this world is a little weirder than maybe some of us might think that it is? and I know this year has been very bizarre, but I don't know. I feel like when it comes to some of these types of topics and others, I feel like 10 years ago, even if you brought up some of these things, people, no one believed them. 10 years ago, it was, hearing even a term like the Illuminati. That was kind of a little underground. That wasn't, whether you believe in them or not, it wasn't something that was like widely, spoken about, let's say 10 years ago or even further back. And now I feel like this stuff is kind of, I don't know if I want to call it mainstream, but it's certainly, I think that there's been something of, a willingness to at least hear out this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's been a big kind of shift in, public perspective as far as, weirder events go. And I think it's, really just a topic of fascination for a lot of people. I think as we become more informed about things as far as, science and stuff goes, there's this general idea that there's a lot of things that we can't explain that may have very logical conclusions that we just don't have the knowledge to really connect the dots yet. But I think there is kind of, like you say, I think there is kind of this more extreme thirst for knowledge about these things and, these situations that make people scratch their heads. They're a lot more prone to wanting to figure those things out and get answers. And, even just with the internet being a thing, the way we share information about, odd things and the way that we, theorize with other people has changed a lot. And it's a very common thing now. And I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, and there are so many things, too, that are just so weird and inexplainable or unexplainable. And, maybe if we talk again in the future in an interview, I love to kind of deep dive into some of this other stuff. But one of them being, I don't even know what you would even call it, but it's kind of like glowing humanoid type figures that are seen in the sky, kind of floating. Like, have you seen any of the footage of that?
I haven't seen any of the footage. I've heard, just forums and stuff like that, reports of those types of things. I haven't actually seen any footage of it for myself, but I've definitely heard about it.
I've seen some videos on YouTube, and I'm a person. I don't actually I don't personally believe in aliens, for example, but and there might be like a reasonable explanation of what they are, but I'm definitely open to hearing that stuff. But I mean, I've seen some footage and I'm just like, what is this? Because even the crafts, I feel like you could come up with rationale and say, oh, well, it's this or it's that, or it is a human craft, but it's, shaped like a UFO, so to speak. But the human ones, that's one that really does make me scratch my head. And there's a lot of things like that, where you just kind of think to yourself like, okay, is something going on here? It's like even with, like the flat Earth whole, when that thing was really blowing up. Again, I believe that the Earth is a globe, but some of their points that they would bring up sometimes, maybe they were explainable, but they would say things like, oh, well, why can't you fly over Antarctica? Or why can't you do this or that? And it would lead me to think like, yeah, that is an interesting point. Like, why can't we do certain things? I mean, that doesn't mean I believe that the Earth is flat, but there were things where you're like, that is weird. Like, why does it seem like, I don't know, in some regards, I almost feel like transparency kind of quells some of these ideas a little bit. And I feel like there's a lot of things that are going on that if we just kind of had explanations, I think it would help, I don't know, people just believe the official narrative more.
Right. I think it's really one thing that I feel positively about kind of in this day and age is that there does seem to be this healthy desire to answer these kinds of questions. And I think that's important because, without that desire to figure these types of bizarre things out, you'll never get anywhere. That's the driving force. So I think it's important to question these types of things and to search for answers and stuff like that. And I think it's cool, just from even an entertainment perspective to kind of listen to these theories and stuff like that, even if they don't lead anywhere, particularly strange, but just to listen to them. And, I'm not like a believer in flat Earth or anything either, but it is, I still get a fair amount of enjoyment out of listening to perspectives. And I really like hearing different perspectives. And that's probably why I'm so into the things that I'm into as far as, the paranormal and stuff like that is I just really like opening my mind up to, wider perspectives about things. And I think it puts a kind of almost beautiful kind of spin on life that, maybe not take everything at face value. And I think, I think that's the way to live. And I think that's how a lot of people look at stuff like this now. And I don't know. I think it's a good thing.
No, I agree with you. And some of them are entertaining. I mean, one that I've always kind of found entertaining, for example, is, certain celebrities or famous people being reptilians, like reptilian aliens. And the one about that usually it's the videos that I've personally seen to quote, prove it, are these people, they're on camera and their eyes, it's like they focus on the eyes and it looks like, their pupils are all black. And when they blink, it's like their eyelids are going sideways instead of, and, stuff like that. It's kind of like, I don't believe that they're reptilians, but some of the stuff, when people really start digging into it and they start saying in certain videos, I remember just listening to certain videos probably a couple years ago where what they were describing sounded like we were living on a different planet. We have reptilian aliens fighting the Anunnaki in Syria, and it's like, what? It's like, how did you go this far? And I don't know. Some of this stuff, it's definitely entertaining, and other stuff, some of the times it is really worth, hearing out the argument, especially what we originally were talking about with David Poliitis' stuff. In my mind, that's a real argument. It's like, okay, there's people missing. Is that, if it's not disputed, if that comes down and says, okay, these people are missing, then the question is how did so many people go disappearing? How is this possible?
Yeah, no, definitely. And the thing about these cases, that I've been looking at for David Poliitis, is in some cases, I look at them and, he says they're really bizarre. And when he, presents facts, maybe I think about it and I'm like, I feel like I could come up with a rational explanation for that. And there's times where I don't really think there's anything particularly strange going on, and I could think of more rational explanations for a disappearance or why someone's not found or the way that they are found. But the things that really have kept me hooked on this kind of stuff are, that percentage of cases that don't really seem to have much of an explanation. And, I think sometimes I really respect the work that he's put into it and stuff like that. I think there are times where the correlations he's trying to make don't exactly add up, and it's a bit of a stretch. But, again, just that small percentage of times where it is like, it does make you wonder, is something that keeps me kind of coming back as far as his work goes. And I don't know, I think, while some of these cases could be logically explained, I think what's more important are those that kind of seem to defy explanation. And, there's the entertainment value of it, thinking about things and brainstorming possible explanations and, listening to the really far out there theories, because David Poliitis' work does seem to attract like a lot of pretty wild theories as to what could be going on. But, I think you should question stuff like that and look into it, because there's so much, as much as we know and as much as we've come a long way in terms of what we understand about the world around us, and we're, progressing further every day. There is still so much, I feel like, that we don't know and don't understand, and that we should be actively working towards gaining an understanding of.
Have you read about the Lisa Lam death?
Yes, I definitely have. Yeah, I was pretty obsessed with that when I first heard about it. God, it was probably a year or two ago now. That's definitely a bizarre case.
Yeah, that one is probably one of the, in my opinion, one of the weirder publicly known deaths. I mean, especially, you watch that video and you say, okay, like, what the heck is going on here with the elevator? And then, when she's found dead in the water tank. And I know that there was, I don't know if there was a trial, I guess an investigation. What did the investigation finally say? Did she have any drugs in her system? Like, did you see it? Because I thought something like that was kind of going on for a while. But, I mean, what's the official narrative on that?
Yeah, well, to what I remember hearing about it, it was pretty conclusively said that she didn't have any drugs in her system. There was the idea for a while that there could have been, that mental illness could have played a role. I forget which mental illness, but basically that she did have a mental illness and had actually not been taking her medication. So, that kind of speaks to the fact that as far as her movements and kind of how she seemed kind of out of it and stuff like that could have played a role. But I don't think that kind of narrative really explains how she ended up where she did, how she made it onto the roof, how she made it into a water tank, stuff like that, where it was a door that should have been locked, giving her roof access, why she would have even gone up there in the first place. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't really know that there's been an official explanation that has really pleased anyone as far as what happened to her. And, even if you just look at the history of that hotel, there's been some bizarre things that have happened there in the past. So I don't know. That's one of the cases I really love talking about, because it's just so strange. And, any official explanation that's been given hasn't really seemed very satisfying.
I mean, wasn't there also something too, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, was she also naked or partially dressed in the water as well?
No, she was actually completely naked. So that's another...
So when she was found, basically, she was found dead in this water tank, totally naked, right? Is that kind of, like, that was the position she was in when they found her body?
Yeah. And I don't recall if they ever found her clothes. I something leads me to believe that they may not have even found her clothes. But it kind of seems like she just took her clothes off and just climbed into this water tank and drowned. But even what's really strange about it is, a girl of her stature, she doesn't look like she'd really be capable of, removing the door to climb into this water tank in the first place, not to mention once she's inside, closing it back and stuff like that. It's just really strange. And there's a lot of really interesting theories in regards to what exactly happened there. But
yeah, that one is definitely one of the ones where, so you have the weird video, you have, her body in this water tank. I mean, she's naked. I mean, she was like early 20s, something like that, right? 22, something like in that realm. Yeah, and I mean, even when because wasn't she from Canada, and this her death, that happened in a popular hotel in LA. I can't remember the name, but I know that the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. Yeah, he temporarily lived there, or he stayed there for a while. There was some other people too that I know that there was like some other kind of high profile. I don't know if you want to call them weirdos or killers, I guess, but they were also there. And I mean, when she came here too, did she know anybody in LA? I can't remember if that was a part of it too. Like if she came to this, I don't remember hearing about her seeing any friends or anything.
Yeah, no, from what I recall, she was there on a school kind of program. I don't recall if there were other students staying in the same hotel or if she was there by herself. If I'm recalling correctly, she was pretty isolated. She was working on art, basically while she was there. That also has to do with why there's theories as to why she wasn't taking her medication. Maybe she felt like it was kind of hindering her artistic ability, and she was there focused on working and stuff like that. But I know she was there for some school related thing, but I don't think I've heard any recounts of people having contact with her while she was there or anything like that.
Yeah, that one is definitely that's definitely a weird one. And, for something like that too, I mean, I guess the question kind of becomes is how many disappearances / deaths like hers happen that aren't, politicized in the media? How many of them happen where we just never hear about them? I mean, and for that one, it kind of seemed like a perfect storm for the media to kind of latch onto. The fact that it was so dramatic, that she's found in the water tank, people are drinking water, and there's like black, goo in the water. It just has such and it's LA. I mean, that just has all the hallmarks of a scary movie. Yeah, and I mean, how many people though, or how many instances that are similar to that have happened that, like you talked about earlier, maybe it's just some small suburban town in Michigan or something like that, and a similar thing happens and it never even makes the media.
Yeah, exactly, because we have such a dependency on learning about these things. I mean, we learn about these things from media and stuff like that, and that's kind of where we count on getting this information. And if these things aren't really being reported, or the way they're being reported is just kind of a label is kind of slapped on it that it's inconclusive, and we don't really know what happened. But I don't think in a lot of cases that people really question anything other than the official statement on things, or if they do, they kind of forget about it over time when nothing else comes out. And that's one thing about Elisa Lam that I think it was really popular for a long time, and it gained a lot of notoriety, in the virtual space, and people were really interested in it. But, until you brought it up today, I haven't thought about that in a long time. So it's like, even when people do question these kinds of things, it's like if there's no steady stream of new information coming out about it, they kind of just forget about it, and it's kind of just the past. And I don't know. It's one of those things that I think you question and question until you can't really move forward anymore, and that's unfortunate in a lot of these cases.
You raise a really good point, and yeah, that's just the kind of stuff where, yeah, just, I mean, watching some of those videos too, I just remember now just watching the video of her in the elevator, and it definitely makes your skin crawl. That's for sure. At least for me, like, I watch them, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so unsettling.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like something out of a horror movie. Like, it really does. And the thing that's really chilling about it is that it's, real, and there's no real explanation for it. I think that's the scariest stuff that you can really come across in life, are the things that are real and there's no real explanation for. A movie's a movie and it's for entertainment. You don't really question it. But, when you see something like that, it's really mind-blowing. And I don't know, it just proves that, like, sometimes, life is stranger than fiction. And I think that's something that really fuels a lot of people in looking at stuff like this.
No, you're absolutely right. Well, Renee, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. How can we access the various things that you produce, like the articles, and keep up with you online? Like, where are the best places to go to follow your work?
Yeah, so my Medium publication, you can find it just by going to medium.com and searching for Inside the Simulation. It's me and a group of writers that post there fairly regularly about kind of just odd stuff, paranormal, and then there's also science news and stuff like that. But yeah, you can find my publication by going to medium.com and just searching for Inside the Simulation.
Oh, great. All right, Renee, thank you again, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
All right, take care.